Hello, everybody, and welcome to this installment of talking about the Iliad. Today, first off, we're reading Fegel's version of the Iliad, and we are tackling today the chapter or the book 2 of the text. This is probably the most often skipped text in the whole work if you are truncating the work of the Iliad. It has in it a long list of names and places where people come from, and more often than not, people just skip that. So we're going to look at a few things today in book 2 of the Iliad and just talk about what is there and what is important. I think it's understandable when you are trying to break up the text, the long text of the Iliad, to break it up and take out a few things and to move the story along as much as possible. Number two, it's understandable that you would cut that out. Nevertheless, it is worthwhile looking at as well. So I would just say let's move forward on that. Now, first off, this is a quick reminder of a few things that we went over last time. The history. This is a long poem, 15,693 lines of poetry. So it's a long poem divided into 24 books all total. It is about primarily the story of Achilles in the last year of the 10-year-long Trojan War. It is a poem sung sometime in the 8th, 7th century, somewhere in there, during the end of the Greek Dark Ages, sung to the courts of Ionia. So all of that is basic stuff to know. It's poetry-wise, it is written in a dactylic hexameter, which is emphasized on, emphasized on, emphasized on, emphasized on, emphasized on, 6 feet total. Okay. So that being said, we went over also a few things, which is that I think that the poem was sung with a full accompaniment. It's unclear whether or not it was performed in toto or whether it was in pieces. I'm thinking that it was in pieces that were later put together as a collected all total, and that probably the original performance was, you sing a piece here, you sing a piece there, which would ultimately constitute a full 24-book poem at some point in the future. But at the time that it was first performed, I think, as individual performances of this scene or that scene, what is commonly referred to as the oral tradition. Remember also that last time I brought up the idea that the story of Achilles, which is the main thread of the story here, the rage of Achilles, that story is, in my opinion, involving a concept in the ancient world which was pretty ubiquitous. That is the concept of change or alteration, what is called in Greek metamorphosis, or metamorphosis if you're British. This style of thinking about human life said that all human life, primarily men, but all human life goes through this stage of alteration, and the best way to look at it is to look at nature and how nature does it. And so frequently the image of the butterfly as the stages of metamorphosis. And Achilles is in that roughly late teenage, early 20-something period, which was commonly equated with what was called the chrysalis stage, the shining. This is the stage where the hard shell of armor is around the goo that will later become the butterfly, the final form of the creature. So here we have the story of the Iliad, which takes us through the results of Achilles making a great oath based on anger at Agamemnon, and he makes this tremendous oath of not joining the army and letting them rot, letting them die. And he makes a prayer to Zeus to hurt them, punish them, kill them. And his mother Thetis takes that prayer up to Zeus, and Zeus honors Thetis, and so he basically says, "I'll do it. I'll punish the Achaeans," and so they'll call Achilles back, and he'll get what he wants. That's last time. The story last time, and we also notice that when he rages against Agamemnon, he's ready to kill him, that Athena has to come and grab him by his long hair and hold him back and break him from that violence that would emerge from the mania, the menon that he was engaging in. So here we are in book 2, and book 2, after the prayer, after Zeus has agreed to grant the request, grant the prayer of Thetis. We go into book 2, and it starts off with Zeus musing how he's going to do this, how he's going to set it all into play, and at the same time have his own will work out, because as it says in book 1, the will of Zeus was moving towards its end. What is that end? It's hard to say what exactly it is. I think that the end goal of Zeus, according to the poet, is actually this metamorphosis, this change or alteration of the young man Achilles into an adult. So how was he going to honor his request to Thetis and at the same time move his will, which is the will of the natural pattern, the pattern of youth and growth into maturity? How was he going to affect that event? And he considers how he's going to do it, and he says to Agamemnon, and will prompt Agamemnon to call together all of the armies, and will say to Agamemnon in the dream that you can take the city of Troy. The text in Phagos says, now you can take the broad streets of Troy. So he promises in the dream to Agamemnon that he can take the broad streets of Troy. Now, remember last time that we talked about how the depiction of the gods is actually a negative depiction, because I think what Homer is doing is, as he is looking at the metamorphosis that Achilles goes through, he's exalting humans. He's taking humans and making them into the heroes of the story, which is rather unique. In the ancient world, the heroes of the story were either heroes, that is like superheroes for us, almost like Superman, and incredibly powerful beings, Wonder Woman, even Spider-Man, I suppose. But basically they were heroes, or they were gods, but they were very seldom actual normal humans, just enduring human stuff. And so I think that one thing he's doing is he's flipping that a bit. He's showing us that the gods aren't entirely perfect, beautiful, wonderful, emulatable. They're not even worthy of worship in some instances. And here we get one of the first ones, because Zeus is obviously trying to effect both the natural order of metamorphosis, but he's also trying to honor the promise he made to this good-looking nymph who came and begged him by grabbing him behind the knees and blah, blah, blah. How's he going to do that? And so what he is he's duplicitous. He basically lies to Agamemnon. And he says to Agamemnon, you can take the broad streets of Troy. But he leaves out the not yet part. That's kind of a lie. And so although we can understand it with Zeus trying to effect the change that he wants to effect, it's kind of hard to understand as an honorable human, right? This is not honorable. So, and this dream comes to Agamemnon, and Agamemnon wakes up and says, how am I supposed to interpret this? I've been given a dream of I can actually take the city and have it be over. How can I do this? I want to first off test the mettle of my own men to find out whether or not they have the zeal, the ability to, and the encouragement, morale, to be able to take the city. So he calls his generals together and he tells them the full dream. And he says to his generals, now we're going to assemble the men and I'm going to tell them to cut and run. And you hold them back, because I want to see just what are they made of? Are they going to cut and run? What's going to happen? So anyway, this man, Atrides, right, it says, and every time it says Atrides, by the way, that's son of Atreus. Son of Atreus. We'll get to that in just a minute. The son of Atreus calls the men to assemble. He tests what the Greeks call this thumos. Thumos is this power in the chest, the power to conquer. It's we would call it maybe courage as a similar thing. But thumos and thumotic spirit was the spirit to defend what needs defending, to do great deeds of honor. That's thumos. And he's testing their thumotic spirit. And he basically says to the assembly, hey, the battle's over. We've been doing this now for 9 years. It's not gonna work. Let's go home, cut and run. And I think in some ways the hope is that they won't, that they'll be like, no, 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 we want to stay. We want to take Troy. So there's like a dash of Homeric humor here. Homer's funny stuff, you have to get a taste for it because sometimes it's not really funny in our eyes. But I think this is a dash of Homeric humor, to say, all right, my people, now we are finished. Go home. I can't stand it anymore, with the expectation that they aren't. And then they're like, yeah, let's go home. And they all run to the ships. So anyway, they cut and run. And the scene gets really out of hand because all these Greeks, these Achaeans, are running down to the ships, ready to go home. They're sick of it. They're tired of it. Athena and Hera, seeing this, get really worried. The goddess get really worried. Because remember that Hera and Athena are on the side of the Achaeans. They want to destroy Troy, and they want the city punished. Why is that? Well, it's a number of different reasons, but one of the myths that undergirds their animosity towards Achaia, we'll get to later. It's called the Judgment of Paris, and we'll get to that in the next book. But there's another reason why they are ticked at Troy, that basically Poseidon, who is in favor of Troy, has been against them, and there was a challenge of building the walls of the city, and Poseidon was able to do it, et cetera, and it ticked off Hera and Athena. So they have a long-standing feud with Poseidon. But then there's also this Judgment of Paris, and that has to do with Aphrodite, who was a supporter of Troy and all that story as it felt that later. But their animosity towards Troy makes them very worried because here all the Achaeans are running for their ships. What do we do? So Hera turns to Athena. She's like, hey, do something. And so Athena goes down and she finds her man in the street. She's got an agent there in the Achaean army, Odysseus. And she prompts Odysseus to do something. So she's like, hey, do something. And Odysseus, who, by the way, I don't know, this is just me, but I kind of see Odysseus kind of like Batman or something. He's like the guy who's always got a plan. This is not how Odysseus dies, And so he always has a plan. He always has a way of figuring stuff out. He's one of the first characters to notice things, one of the first characters to see danger, one of the first characters to be able to lie his head off if he has to in order to survive. So he's a guy who uses masks all the time. And Athena, who is the goddess of warcraft, very much a supporting goddess for Odysseus. So she goes down and she says, hey, my man, do something. And Odysseus is like, okay, I'll do something. So Odysseus goes and he encourages the troops by hitting some of them and encouraging others to turn around. This is a trick. Don't you realize it's a trick? And all the people are like, oh, yeah, duh, it's a trick. And they start to turn around. But there's one guy. There's always one. There's always one in that crowd. And this guy's named Thersites. And Thersites is like, Agamemnon sucks. The war sucks. Everybody sucks. We're all terrible. Let's go home. And he is, again, Homeric humor. You have to get a flavor for Homeric humor because it's not obvious on the first lick. But this time Thersites is humorous in the story. He's malformed. He's like hunchbacked, and he's kind of like the greasiest character there. And he's always like insulting everybody, and everybody hates him. So he's a perfect foil because everybody is saying, let's go home, let's go home. And Thersites, let's go home, let's go home. But the minute that Odysseus singles out Thersites, everybody turns against Thersites because he's the guy you want to hate. And so Odysseus basically insults him and says, Odysseus, I don't need to follow you at all. And Odysseus takes this, he takes a staff and he cracks him over the back. This is just pure physical humor here in the Odyssey, in the Iliad. He cracks him over the back, and Thersites, the tears start to break out in his eyes. He starts to cry. And he's like, ha, 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 look at Thersites crying. Isn't that funny? And they all start jeering at him and throwing junk. But that turns the crowd, and it alters the trajectory of the crowd away from the war because they were all ready to go home after 9 years. I mean, who wouldn't be, right? But the second that they see that Thersites is the one who's getting really hammered by Odysseus, Odysseus becomes the courageous Batman character, and Thersites becomes the butt of everybody's joke. Nobody wants to be like Thersites. And so all of a sudden they're like, yay, we're with you, Odysseus. Let's get to it. Let's do this war thing. And it turns the entire tenure, the flavor of the scene around, and everybody joins back with Agamemnon. So it's a perfect ploy. And Odysseus is just set up perfectly to be able to act it. So anyway, the rallying of the troops occurs, and Agamemnon then prays for victory. Zeus, that victory. But that's where the text says that Zeus lied. We didn't know that he lied until this line, but it says that in the Phagos, it says, but the son of Kronos would not bring his prayer to pass, not yet. You see, so Zeus has said in the dream, go, you'll be able to take the streets of Troy. And we think, well, that's kind of cool. Zeus is granting him the power to do this. And then Agamemnon, having all the troops now behind him, says, oh, Zeus, give me power to take the streets of Troy. And the text, the narrator says, the son of Kronos would not bring his prayers to pass. So there's a certain cognitive dissonance there in a way, if you're reading this, because Zeus had just said, you're going to take the streets of Troy. Right. And now he's saying, oh, no, you're not. Well, not yet anyway. I forgot to put that part in, that not yet business. And so now we understand Zeus lied. That's part of the bigger program that Homer is trying to create here. Homer is consciously throughout the whole poem undercutting the gods, which I find to be really rather radical. It's really quite a shocking thing to find, because prior to the writing of this poem, all the other little poems that surrounded it, all the previous stories, the Gilgamesh, they always extolled the gods as being perfect, right decisions, right actions. They always did what was good and noble and true, at least true for them. And they were sort of the paragons. They're like, that's what you want to aspire to. That's what you want to worship. That's what you want to emulate. Now you get gods who are like, that god sucks. And not only that, but they're also kind of funny, but they make you like scratch your head and say, wait a minute, is Zeus a liar? I thought Zeus was the top chief. Why is he a liar? That's intentional, folks. That's actually Homer undercutting your vision of the gods. He's a radical. He's an iconoclast, I suppose you could say, in that sense. And he'll do this again and again. So we'll see it again later in the story. Zeus and Hera and Aphrodite and Hermes and Ares, all of them, and even Poseidon, will become these sort of like, I don't know if I really want to worship those guys. So anyway, that's part of the theme that's being developed here. But I want to go back to something for just a minute, okay, before we get into the list of armies. Let me go back to something that's brought up here in the text, where Agamemnon is called Atrides. Now, we might not see that immediately as important. The names that sometimes come up are confusing to us as students. It's true. What he frequently does is he'll take the name of a deed that the character did, or the father of the character, or maybe the epithet, right? So like the lesser Ajax, the greater Ajax. So we have to get used to the fact that he's replacing the name with something else, just to vary the text a bit, shake it up, connect it to something else. And here what he's doing with Agamemnon is, by calling him Atrides, which is frequently brought up, he's connecting him to the story of the house of Atreus. And I want to talk about that for just a minute. The story of the house of Atreus. Okay. This story of the house of Atreus is probably one of the, most soap opera of all stories in the ancient world. But it is a story that is basically a story about being cursed a lot of times. If you can imagine, Game of Thrones, what we used to watch when we were kids, the story of Dallas, that sort of thing, you get an idea of what this is about, because this house of Atreus has always been on the cutting edge of power, and they have always been on the cursed side of violence and blood. So let's look at a family tree really quick here, if I can get this to work. There she blows. Okay, this is a family tree of the house of Atreus. Now, if we look here, it's misspelled. Well, it's not misspelled. It's spelled in a different way, but this is Atreus. If you can see my cursor, This is Atreus here in the upper left-hand corner, roughly. And Atreus, who marries Arope, has sons, Agamemnon, Menelaus, and Anaxibia, a daughter. We can ignore her for a minute. The two others, Agamemnon and Menelaus, are the brothers that we see in this poem. They are the kings of Sparta and forget the rule of Menelaus. I forget where he rules. Pardon me. Oh no, Menelaus is Sparta. Agamemnon is the other one. Thebes, I think, maybe. But anyway, they are Mycenaean rulers who have gained their power through certain, I don't know, you could say not legitimate gangster ways. They're gangsters. Yeah, they're gangsters. That's what it is. They're pirates. They're gangsters. Okay. So these gangsters come from a long gangster family, kind of like the Sopranos or something. And their father was Atreus. And Atreus was the son of, if you look up here in the middle with the green, Pelops, when he married Hippodamia. And Pelops was the son of, if you look up here at the very top, Tantalus and Dione. Now, we begin here with Tantalus, because Tantalus has a story, Pelops has a story, Atreus has a story, and we're reading the story of Agamemnon and Menelaus. And all of this would have been packed into the characters when the bard was performing the piece. So everybody who heard Agamemnon doing something or Menelaus doing something would have remembered, oh, yeah, that's that guy from that gangster family, right? Yeah, okay. And they'd attach it immediately, to all that imagery that was going on. We don't get that because we don't know these stories as well. So let's go back to Tantalus for a minute. Now, Tantalus, you might have heard the word tantalizing. Ooh, that's tantalizing, right? That's from Tantalus. Why? Well, Tantalus has this funny notion that the gods don't know everything. Why would you think that, right, Homer? I mean, come on. And so what does he do? If I remember the story, he tests the gods. He tries to get the gods basically to make a mistake. And he takes his own son, cuts him up, carves him up, and puts him into a pie, right? Puts him into a meal. And he invites all the gods to come and eat the meal. And they all sit down. And immediately they all recognize that this is human flesh. And that's disgusting, Tantalus. How could you do that? So Tantalus completely fails because the gods, they know. They see everything. So they take Tantalus and they throw him into hell. And Hades, but hell. And he's chained or tied, or sometimes people say, some stories say that he's nailed to this riverbed of water that flows past him all the time. And above him is an olive tree or a grape tree in some stories. It doesn't matter. Something with fruit. And every time he tries to reach up to get an olive, the wind blows and the branches go away and he can't get an olive or a grape or an apple or whatever it is. And every time he gets thirsty, he tries to go down to drink the water, and the river dries up. Bummer, dude. What kind? This is a punishment and a half, right? You can't get your Slurpee, and you can't get your Twinkies, and what do you do? So that's for all eternity, by the way. And Tantalus is still in Hades, trying to get grapes and trying to get water. So it's a long time coming for this poor son of a gun. And that's why we say this is tantalizing, because it sits there in front of you and it looks delicious, but you can't have it. Tantalus is punished, and the gods reassemble the body of his son Pelops, all except for his shoulder, because in another circumspect story, these stories always interlock with each other. They interweave. In another story, we have Ceres, who is Ceres is basically the goddess of planting and of growth and of new life. Okay, we get the word cereal from the goddess Ceres, and her daughter has been captured by Hades, the god of the underworld. Persephone has been taken to Hades, and Ceres is looking for her daughter. She can't find her daughter, and she's sad and miserable. And she's miserable and nothing grows, and that's why winter occurs. And eventually she finds her daughter and brings her daughter back to Earth, and that makes the seasons, essentially. But during this period of time when she can't find her, she's searching for her and she's miserable. She's distracted, and so she eats the flesh of Pelops, eats his left shoulder. I think it's his left. And the gods have to replace the shoulder with some silver, and they make a silver shoulder. And so Pelops is referred to as a silver-shouldered Pelops occasionally. That's Pelops' business. So he goes on and he marries Hippodamia, and he has a number of children. I don't need to name them all here, but you will notice two in particular that are important. One is this character here, Thyestes. He'll come up over and over again in different stories. And then there's Atreus here. Okay, Atreus. Well, Thyestes and Atreus, who are brothers, don't get along too well. And Atreus, if memory serves, has a falling out with his brother. So let's look for just a minute at that story of Atreus and Thyestes. And I promise you, I'll get back to the text of Homer here. But it's important to note, these stories, again, were packed into the imagery that Homer is using, and we don't have access to this. So having access to these little stories kind of gives us an understanding of what's going on slightly better than we would have otherwise. So let's look at the story of the tale of Atreus and Thyestes for a minute. It says, this is, by the way, taken from GreeceHighDefinition.com, right? And good story to tell, the tale of Atreus and Thyestes. The feud between the brothers Atreus and Thyestes is one of the darkest chapters in Greek mythology. The brothers were sons of King Pelops and Queen Hippodamia. Their rivalry began in earnest over the throne of Mycenae. I see. Okay, so Mycenae is the throne that they're struggling both to possess. To settle the dispute, it was agreed that the throne would go to whoever possessed a miraculous golden lamb. Atreus' wife, Irope, had secretly become the lover of Thyestes. At his urging, she stole the golden lamb from Atreus and gave it to Thyestes, who then used it to claim the throne. So Thyestes gets the throne illegally, if you will, by stealing this golden lamb from his brother, who had actually gotten the golden lamb. Okay. Atreus was eventually restored to power after Zeus intervened, sending Hermes to arrange a deal. If the sun reversed its course in the sky, Thyestes would abdicate. The sun famously moved backward, and Atreus reclaimed his throne, exiling his brother. So Atreus claims the throne because of their mirabile dictu, this miraculous event, and his brother is exiled, thrown out. So Thyestes is thrown out, but he's not killed. And then come back later. Atreus, consumed by rage over the affair and the stolen throne, orchestrated a horrific revenge. He lured Thyestes back to Mycenae under the guise of reconciliation and a celebratory feast. So he throws him out, and then he's like, let's make up, let's hug and kiss and all that, and make the feud inside of the gangster family okay. You know, come, I love you, my brother, Rocco. Oh, go, come on. So he brings him back, and he gives him a banquet. Only the banquet is a cannibalistic banquet. There's a theme going on here in this family, isn't there? So anyway, during the banquet, Atreus served Thyestes a stew made from the flesh of his own sons, Aglaus, Archomenos, and Callileon. Boy, right? Tantalizing, eh? So after Thyestes had eaten, Atreus revealed the severed heads, hands, and feet of the boys, mocking his brother with the gruesome truth. This event is famously known as the Thyestean Feast, a term that's kind of represent the ultimate act of cruelty and taboo. Oh, and I beg your pardon. Here, this is where I'm reading this. I'll put it in the thing too, so you can read it yourself. Well, anyway, Thyestes sought counsel from an oracle who told him that the only way to achieve true vengeance was to father a son by his own daughter, Pelopia. Man, these Sopranos. Thyestes, disguised in darkness, attacked and raped Pelopia. During the struggle, she managed to take his sword. Unaware of his true parentage, Atreus later encountered Pelopia and married her, raising her son, Aegisthus, as his own. Okay. Years later, when Thyestes was captured and brought to Mycenae, Atreus ordered Aegisthus to execute him. However, when Aegisthus drew the sword he had been given by his mother, Thyestes recognized it as his own. Upon learning the truth that Aegisthus was his son and Pelopeia was his daughter, Pelopeia committed suicide in horror. Aegisthus then turned the sword on Atreus, killing him to avenge his father and restoring Thyestes to the throne. Oh boy. So that's why we have Pelopeia down here with Thyestes, who is actually the dad, siring Aegisthus. Now, that's one side of the crime family. The other side of the crime family is Atreus, who has a son by Aerope, and the kids he has are these three, Agamemnon, Menelaus, and their sister, Anaxibia. Not to let the cat out of the bag, but we find out later, right? Because Thyestes actually has cursed Atreus and said, your whole house will descend into blood. And later on, when Agamemnon comes home, we see this in the tragedies later on, right? Especially the great tragedy of the Aristean trilogy, which is the only trilogy left to us of classical world Greece. And in that story, Agamemnon comes home and his wife has taken up as a lover with Aegisthus. And so Aegisthus is restored to the throne because they chop Agamemnon up in the bathtub. And that's the end of him. And then, of course, his son takes revenge later on, and we have the demons chasing him across the countryside. So there we have the stories of the house of Atreus. Now, the question that would come up, how does this all affect what we read in Homer? Well, I think there are a number of things. First off, when we deal with Agamemnon and Menelaus, we are not just dealing with cookie cutter characters who are the rulers. These guys are from a gangster family, and they are guys that are prone to anger and violence, both of them. Agamemnon especially. And as we find out later, they have married twin sisters in the people of Helen and Clytemnestra. And they, living as close as they are, they have a long history in their family tree of violence and incest and betrayal and cannibalism. So it kind of, in a way, I think it fleshes out who this person Agamemnon is. He has been trying to fight this war for 9 years now. And what has it gotten him? He has nothing to show for it. Frustrating. And he knows back home that his wife is angry, at least, at him, maybe you could say. Because he himself has done a little deed in order to get the whole thing launched. Now, that's maybe a story for another day, but the story of how he got the whole Trojan army over there, or the whole Achaean army over there to Troy is a story of violence in itself. So here he is just frustrated, having agonized over this war for so many years. And along comes this little peon, Achilles, who is like 21, 22, because Agamemnon's probably, I'll put him in his 40s probably. Here comes this peon, Achilles, and he's out of nowhere. What is this guy? He was dressing as a girl at one point, which is we'll get to that story. He was dressing as a girl at one point. And now here he is fighting and taking cities and getting booty and getting all the acclaim. Who is this little upstart? And you can kind of, in a way, I think, begin to sympathize with Agamemnon's anger at having the girl stripped away from him at the very beginning of the story, and then his anger at having Achilles get all the acclaim, and then his anger, basically, at being told by Achilles, hey, give back the girl. Right? I mean, wow. That would be, in a way, I suppose, like having some goody two-shoes come out of nowhere and tell Tony Soprano, hey, maybe you shouldn't be so violent. What are you talking to me for? Yeah, I think it changes. Like when we learn all these little stories that attach themselves to Homer, I think it really changes how we view the characters, or it can change how we view the characters. It's not just that the stories themselves, which are very interesting, are contributing to this poem. It's almost like you're entering into the world that Homer knew and was singing in, and he assumed, and his audience assumed, that these stories were just what they were, that they just existed. And so when they hear about the various characters he's singing about, they understand it. And it allows us to understand more when we find out these stories. What is the motivation behind this character? What's the purpose of this? What's the purpose of that? Why would Agamemnon then try and test his troops to find out if they're still loyal to him? Maybe he's been doing that for 9 years. Maybe there's been constant instances of people rebelling against him for the past 9 years. Well, Homer, in the marvelous way that he does, then moves to listing the armies, because he's kind of set the stage now with this little scene of Odysseus thwacking Thersites and Agamemnon losing control of the army, and finally him praying, getting the army back under control and praying. And then the statement that no, he's not going to take it to the streets of Troy. That little throwaway line by Homer, and then we're in this state where we're like, okay, well, who's fighting here? Who's fighting here? All right, now, again, I understand perfectly if you're skipping this bit of all these different names, I get it, because it's a lot of names. It's a long time to read every single name. But the thing that really unlocked this section for me was hearing from a performance of the Iliad, or bits of the Iliad that I saw back 15 years ago or so, where the performer basically said that this list was like the list of the fallen in combat. I mean, for instance, you might skip over this list. It's true. In the same way that you might skip over the list of names on the World War I memorial, or the list of names on the Vietnam memorial, or the list of names on the 9/11 memorial. Because as a young person, especially, who are those people? You've never heard of them, right? You may never have heard of all these people that died at Verdun, all these people that died at the Somme, all these people, that died at Dunkirk, or who died on D-Day, or all these people that died there in Saigon, or, you never heard of these people. Who are they to you, right? You don't know them from Adam's socks. And as a young person, I hate to say it, because I went through it too, okay? And I'm sure every man who watches this and every woman who watches this probably would agree, I went through it too. When you're young, you're immortal. You have no ties necessarily immediately that are in jeopardy. You have no cares or worries necessarily. You're invulnerable. You can do anything you want, right? You can run amok in the streets of Minneapolis. You could drive down the middle of a Main Street in Chicago and throw rockets everywhere because you're young. Might as well. And what Homer, I think, is actually telling us to some degree, because I'm sure that it was no different in his world. I think he's telling us to some degree, you too will one day be in this position. All these dead guys that you skip over on the Vietnam Memorial, they were only 20, 21, 22. They were the same age as Achilles, right? Hard to think about that. I mean, I'm 56 and I've never gone through serious trauma, but I know when I was younger, I didn't really care about all those names listed in the Book of the Dead. I didn't really care about the names on the World War I memorial or the names in the graveyards. These were just names to me. But the older you get, the more you realize I am one of those names. And when you're young, it's almost like you have to be shaken up and say, no, this was your grandfather. This was your uncle. This was your father who went away to a foreign land and died. And he had hopes and he had dreams and he had family and he had loves just like anybody else. And his name now is part of a catalog only. And I think in the book that if you are going to skip it over, like I said, it's perfectly understandable, but just recognize that what Homer is doing in this section is he's setting down the names of real people and real places that they came from. And each individual person has a little story attached to them, a little thing that allows them to be human. What did the people that were on that That grave memorial there for World War II, what did those people think about, go through, deal with? Was it any different than you? What separates them from you? Why are you, as a young person, so special? And they were not. And what will the world be like 40, 50, 60 years from now when you are no longer part of it? And you are now part of the roll of names in the Book of the Dead. I think it's a very powerful philosophical consideration that's brought up here, to be honest. Homer lists all these names, and it gives us certainly archaeologically a remembrance of where these people were from and what they were like. That's true. And he gives us the names of the Trojans as well. And he gives us, it's almost, you could say it's like looking at the stats of Wikipedia when you look at a battle and it says how many Frenchmen and how many English, it's kind of like that. But I think more to the point is he is saying in a way, this is you. I think a very fine thing to do would be to read through it. And as you read through it, think of, where am I in this list? Are there any people in this list that I identify with? If you ever go to see the Vietnam Memorial, for instance, in Washington, D.C., go through the names, right? Not just to find relatives that might be related to you, but to find names of people maybe who were like you, who had stories like you, who engaged in loves and worries and cares and hopes and dreams just like you. And why is that ultimately important as we analyze the text? Remember that one of the major themes of the text is metamorphosis, change, alteration. It is the change from being a carefree, silly, unattached child to being an adult. And in the midst of that metamorphosis is knowing who you are as a person, what the Greeks called nothese auton. As you come to know who you are as a person, you are coming to understand where you fit in that role of the dead. Who are you in the role of the dead? Who are you in relationship to these people who went through these experiences and who were exactly like you in bone and flesh and imagination? And in that way, you know yourself better and can move towards metamorphosis, I suppose, as well. One last thing. It is interesting in the text that you have the list of all these Achaeans and all the places they came from and all the things that they were doing, all these young men. And then at the very end of it, it's like, where's Waldo? Where's Achilles? Where is that guy? If, for instance, Achilles had been numbered among them, it might be a different story. We wouldn't have the story, right? But at the very end of all these lists of young men who are about now to assault the walls of Troy, and many of whom will die, at the very end of it, you have Achilles. And where is Achilles? Achilles, as the text says, he's off in his beaked seagoing ships. He's lying down in his beaked seagoing ships. He's having a little rest, a little vacay. I think personally that the author, the poet, is trying to shame Achilles here. Because keep in mind, what Achilles has done is not a good thing. When he makes that oath to pull himself away from the war, it's not a good thing. It's understandable, right? Because he's furious and Agamemnon's a jerk, gangster, parasite. But it's not a good thing that Achilles does. He steps away from the battle. Why? Because he's been insulted. Again, understandable. We get insulted. We're like, I'm taking my ball. I'm going home. And who wants to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune? The proud man's contumely. Who wants to suffer that when you can simply get in your automobile and take off, go to the beach, crack open a cold one? You don't have to be tied to anybody. You don't have to have any duties. You don't have to have any responsibilities to anybody else because you're young. But all the people that you would be letting down, should you do that, is the consideration. This is where, the poem can be seen as a real academic piece of work. We're analyzing this as a piece of academic. Oh, yeah, it means this, it means that, critical theory, blah, blah, blah. We could do that. But I think it's much more profitable to look at the poem as something that's absolutely imminent. It's right here in our lives. And when we look, for instance, at this instance, that is, how does our selfishness, how does our refusal to suffer with others affect our lives and the lives of others? How does that happen? I think it really hits home. There's a scene, for instance, in Band of Brothers, if you've ever watched that great series, there's a scene where one of the characters gets hurt during the initial battle, and he gets shipped off to recoup. It's actually during Market Garden, right? The campaign that went so badly off, and he gets hurt. And the rest of the guys get sent to the front at some point to block the offensive called the Battle of the Bulge. And when those guys get back, they're really changed. They're much more severe, much more harsh, much more adult, if you will. And the guy who has not been with them, even though he was friends with them originally and they went through D-Day together, he's almost like an outcast. He's almost like somebody that they refuse to associate with. Why? He didn't do anything wrong, right? He just wasn't there. He didn't endure the same suffering. He didn't endure the same kind of horror that they endured there at Bastogne. The saying that true friendship occurs only after you've eaten your handful of salt together, which means when you suffer with somebody else, you create these bonds with someone else. That the converse of that is, if you refuse to suffer with someone else, you do not create those same bonds. In fact, you create almost walls with other people. That guy in Band of Brothers, who was an outcast, he was an outcast because an accident, because he got hurt during Market Garden. It wasn't his fault, and yet he was outcast. Imagine how much more somebody who says, I refuse to enter into combat. I refuse to do this. I am going to shirk my duty, or I'm going to take my ball and go home. Imagine how much worse it will be for that guy. And even though Achilles is separate from battle, as it says here, all these other guys that we've just listed who have moms and dads, brothers, sisters, homes, who have a childhood, they don't get that luxury. They can't just duck out. They have to go into combat. And Achilles, what's so interesting, subtle about the poem. Achilles is not just sitting in his tent, he's lying down in his tent, taking his ease. That son of a biscuit. Why would he do that to other people? Why would he betray people he has known now for several years? Easily 7. He comes into the war in the 2nd or 3rd year. How could he betray those people? Is this manliness? Is this strength? Doesn't seem to be. It seems almost like the poet, just by that little sentence, is jabbing at Achilles, blubber boy, who goes and cries to his mommy because he has the luxury to do so. All these other poor blokes don't cry to their moms. They can't. Their moms are way back there in Achaean lands. Achilles blubbers to his mom, and then his mom, who has access to the gods, right? Because she's like this jet-set, highfalutin type. Well, one of the uber wealthy, because she's a nymph, has the luxury of being able to get things done by going right to the gods. These guys don't have a mom who's a nymph. Their mom is just this misshapen old lady who cooks them good biscuits in the morning, right? Or did before they went off to war. I love that. I love that little kernel. It's like these little gems that Homer throws out. And if you miss them, fine, there would be other gems. But when you catch them, you just want to grab Achilles and just shake that guy. Because he's not going to be in the list of the dead. He's too good for it. And besides, he's angry. And Agamemnon insulted him by taking away his love toy. Yeah. Anyway, that's book 2. Book 2 basically ends with that list of the Trojans, and then we cut to book 3, which we'll cover next week. But if there are any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or the comments. Right now, that's all I have for you, folks. We'll catch you on the other side when we look at Helen reviewing the troops. We'll talk about her story. We'll talk a little bit about the judgment of Paris and about Leda and the Swan. We have a question from the studio audience. The question from Rollin. So if I'm hearing correctly, you are suggesting that Achilles is selling out his war brothers to fate for the sake of his wounded pride. Yes. Yes. For the sake of his wounded little pride, he's selling everybody down the river. Precisely. I often, it's funny you bring that up, actually, because when I have taught this before, I've had students who say, I don't like this guy. I don't think we're supposed to. I think we're supposed to not like Achilles. I think we're supposed to see him as this brat, this fiend, as you said, this spoiled little rich kid. We're supposed to see him as this jerk. And yet, is he us? No. I'm not a jerk. I would never act that way. I don't consider myself to be the center of the universe. I think Homer's suggestion is that yes, when you're young, you do. And part of the process of growing up is realizing you are not the center of the universe. You're not even a grain of sand on one single planet and one solar system in the universe. In some ways, Homer seems to suggest you're kind of a nothing. And now what are you going to do when you recognize that you're kind of a nothing? What are you going to do then? And yes, it reminds us of a chorus to a song by Fleet Foxes. Reminds me of a lot of different things. I'll read this, and then we'll close. Though we're only alive a short while, so many beneath my feet, all weather, you walk with me, and you were off on a wandering mile. I was holding a weak excuse. I was heavy beneath blue. That's kind of cool. Thank you all for joining me, and we'll see you next time when we talk about Book 3 and the story of Helen. So long, folks.